Well, Dave, I was so glad we did part one in our biscuit joinery segment. And I was hoping in part two here, you could give us a little bit of a hands-on, actually how the tool really works, show us a few things, and maybe more importantly, touch on some of the safety aspects.
Absolutely. One of the things that people do is they just take it out of the box and start using it. And that's a huge mistake. Let me show you why. What we want to do first is we're actually going to take a plunge. And of course, we need high protection and hearing protection. So I'll drop these bands in and out. And I'm going to hold this piece down, and I'm going to plunge. Now, that slot is not centered in this material, so we have to do that. But before that, I'm going to take that slot, and I'm going to put the biscuit in. And then I'm going to have you put it right down. And what we're going to do is draw a line. Then I'm going to turn it around, and here's the real big important thing here. If that first line didn't disappear, you can see we have two lines there. If it didn't disappear, it will distract the joint, and there's no way you can close it up. Now, in almost every one, there's a turret here, which you can see, and it's labeled. Usually the 0, 10, and 20, maximum, face frame biscuits, it's all there. And you will have to adjust that for whatever size. We're using number 20 biscuits, okay? Which are basically 20 millimeter wide kerf. And so we know now that the biscuit joiner plunges deep enough. If it didn't, I would simply adjust this pin and allow it to go a little bit deeper. Okay? So that's the first thing. Now, of course, you can see that I'm not centered in the material. So what I'm going to do is actually use this system here, and you simply unlock it, and then we'll bring that down until you're roughly at about 3/8 of an inch. Whenever we biscuit, we want to try to biscuit in the center of whatever it is. Sometimes we can stack them though, and I'll show you that on some pretty thick stuff. So if I go in now, get back with our ears and everything. And now you see this time we're a lot more centered.
Boy, I'll say.
It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be pretty much centered in the material. Now, putting this together, this will be kind of like a cabinet. So if I put this together, what I'm going to do is just make marks. Now here's a way to make a real mistake. If you make a mark all the way across, when you get to this piece, you don't know which side you're biscuiting. So you always just mark across the joint, only across the joint. So let's do it correctly this time. And what we'll do is make a mark here. And make another mark here.
Oh, I see. So not bring it all the way out to the
a lot of people will get their combination square out and they'll go ahead and make a mark all across, and then they'll get to this piece. And because you can see we're only there, you'll know exactly where to go.
Gotcha.
Okay? So that's a huge thing. So there's one, and then we're going to lay out another one, but we'll do it a little differently. A lot of people think of this as something that can only take right angles. But frankly, even something like this can be done and can be biscuited. Okay? Now, it turns out that the width of this machine is pretty close. So we're going to, because we have wiggle room and we can go back and forth, we're just going to actually center it on the piece using the machine. But I could make a mark if I wanted to across the joint. Let's go ahead and do this one first. Now, when you're doing this again, you're going to find out which side you were at, Dave. Okay. This one is on the flat, so it's pretty easy to hold it down. You can also clamp this as well. What we're going to do is actually put a couple of backing boards up. With this, I can just, making sure that everything is locked down and registered. So that's pretty safe. I can hold it down, make sure. This handle, by the way, it's only for walking around the shop with, okay? You don't use the handle.
Interesting.
You see that in the videos all the time. But if you can imagine, if I'm doing this, this gets a little dicey.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's easy to actually clamp it to a couple of stop blocks, and that's what I recommend for the students too. We'll just screw these down, and then it'll be a lot safer to use.
Okay, that makes sense.
So for this vertical one, we'll just clamp across like this. Okay, and we'll go in to the joint. And now, remember which side we're on here. The good news is you never have to worry about flipping it because you're going to make sure that your marks match up. And then what you're looking for, Jim, is you're looking for the joint to be flush.
Right.
So this is how most people will actually use it. But there's a lot of other places that you can use it. I'll show you one that I use all the time. We'll take a couple of the biscuits out. So I'm going to move this in a little closer, Jim, and we're going to use some thick stock.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have something that we can clamp to.
Okay.
And these two pieces have an angle on them. The great part for this biscuit joiner, it doesn't matter what angle. What we're going to do is going to run 2 biscuits in here.
I was wondering how you were going to do this.
And here's the very cool thing on this particular, and this is kind of unique to this joiner. I can drop it down and go at whatever angle I want and just capture it. Now at this point I also have to check my depth, and I'll have to change that. So,
but you can change that angle.
I can change that angle, and the great thing is I'm no measuring, you know. We try not to do it if we don't have to. All I'm going to do is center the tool, and I'm going to bring it down until it hits. Done. And then I'm going to lock the fence in place. So this will be the first plunge. And the big thing with a biscuit joiner, if you do something to one side, got to do exactly the same thing to the other side. What this is going to allow you to do is put thick pieces of wood together and get your miners to line up perfectly. So you can see, we can draw that joint together, clamp it, and when that's adhesed, it's going to be really strong. You saw when you actually broke that piece.
It lines up super nice.
Yeah, and it lines up perfectly. So that's a real plus for a biscuit joiner when you're trying to do joinery on site. This is a very quick thing to cut on a miter saw and then to assemble with your biscuit joiner.
Yeah.
Now there's one bit of safety that's really important. You notice that I was using backstops.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they just don't want to set it up. They don't want to take the time. And this is one thing that happened to one woodworker. And it was a cautionary. It's something that I tell all my students not to do. And what had happened was he was making a bunch of drawers, and he was making out of 1/2 inch stock. Now, on a number 10 biscuit, it doesn't go through a 1/2 inch, which is good. And so he was using it to actually assemble these, and he went to lunch. Someone borrowed the biscuit joiner in the meantime, okay? And they set it from 10 to 20. So the plunge was a lot deeper. And he's missing the tips of his 2 fingers. I'll show you. Not with the fingers, but I'll show you. Okay. So we'll set this biscuit joiner back again. Let's set it down. And height's not important now, but you can see what's going on. So what he was doing was he was holding it like this because he didn't have a backer piece. And what ended up happening is he literally plunged into his fingers.
Yeah.
So using a backer board when you're doing this, especially for smaller pieces of wood, is really, really important.
Because it just keeps your freehand out.
Keeps it safe.
Yeah.
It keeps it safe. And that way, you're not going to have any surprises if you accidentally did have the turret on a larger setting than you wanted.
Okay. Any other safety features or things to keep in mind with respect to a biscuit
It's
joiner?
actually a pretty safe tool when you think about it. It's spring loaded so that it returns. You know, unlike it's basically an angle grinder with a cassette around that holds the blade. But it's a lot safer than an angle grinder because until you plunge, it's perfectly fine. The use is difficult. This is not a very ergonomic tool. It's kind of like our old, pistol grip stuff. It just kind of wears on your wrist and everything too. Most people, when they're using it, they actually pull the trigger. I'll do that now. They leave it on because it has a trigger lock, and that's fine. But I've also actually made little corrals so that the thing can't walk off. Okay. With this kind of a tool, you're plunging very quickly. And that maybe is another thing. You just kind of need to take your time with that. But it's amazing the results you'll get.
Yeah. It's such a great segment, Dave. I'm so glad we did it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.